Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we take a look at the comic book storyline, Batman Nightfall. Before we get into the review, I just want to quickly announce that I've ranked all of the Friday the 13th movies on my horror channel, Rogue's Nightmare Gallery. So if you like Jason Voorhees, that video might be of interest to you. A link is in the description. Anyway, so Nightfall, one of the most well-known and popular Batman arcs. It was published throughout several issues of both Batman and Detective Comics in 1993 and featured the writing of Chuck Dixon, Doug Monk, and Alan Grant, while Jim Aparo, Noel Brayfogle, and Graham Nolan handled the art. A few other artists also contributed to the massive arc, including Klaus Janson and Brett Blevins. Now, there's already a multitude of reviews of Nightfall, both here on YouTube and on the rest of the web. I don't want to just rehash what everyone else has already said about it, so I'm gonna do this review a bit differently. I'm not gonna talk too much about Batman and the themes of the story. Instead, I'm mainly going to focus on each of the escaped Arkham inmates and give you my take on how they were handled by this event. That's obviously very fitting to my channel anyway. Here the spotlight is on the rogues, so if you want a video discussing the actual story more, you should go watch any of the many reviews by other content creators. So in Nightfall we find Bane in Gotham City, planning his scheme to defeat Batman and conquer the town. As we learned in the one-shot Vengeance of Bane, which should be considered as the prologue of this story, Bane grew obsessed with the notion of besting the Dark Knight and taking his city. It's the only way he can become top man of the world, in his view, which is Bane's goal. In order to pull off his plan, the jacked mastermind attacks Arkham Asylum with his crew, armed with rocket launchers and assault rifles, setting the inmates free. Bane and crew then generously supply the inmates with an arsenal of their own, giving them the edge over the Gotham PD. Batman is now forced to round them all up, a massively daunting task, which completely exhausts an already worn out Bruce Wayne. When he's at his weakest, Bane makes his move and confronts Bruce in Wayne Manor, having figured out the Dark Knight's secret identity. The two engage in combat, but of course the hero can't stand a chance in his condition against a venom-fueled monstrosity, leading to Wayne's total defeat at the hands of Bane. The villain doesn't kill him though. Instead, he wants Batman to live with his shame and therefore breaks his back, crippling the hero. What happens next is that John Paul Valley, aka Azrael, an ally of Batman and Robin, takes over the mantle of Batman while Bruce recuperates. But I'm not going to discuss that. Instead, like I said, I'm going to talk about the mass breakout of the rogues and take a closer look at each of them. But before that, I want to talk a bit about Batman. Nightfall is one of the best stories to show that Batman is really just a man. Several issues before the arc started, the comics began to depict Bruce as being both physically and mentally worn out from his many years of running around the streets of Gotham wearing long johns, beating up criminals with his bare fists. Naturally, that would take its strain on a person, but it isn't something that had ever been explored before with Batman. At this point in his career, Bruce had also been at it for over a decade. It's never said in the story how long it's been, but I come to that conclusion by looking at other sources, like The Cult for instance, which came out in 1988, and that story states that Bruce has been Batman for 10 years. The Cult takes place when Jason Todd was still Robin, and in Nightfall he's been dead for at least a year, and Tim Drake has held the title for an equal amount of time, or so I would guess. So yeah, I'd place these events around 12 years into Batman's war on crime. It's not strange that he's worn out after such a long time of physical and psychological punishment. And then this whole Arkham breakout is sprung on him, the biggest in the city's history it seems. All of the inmates are set free here, not just one or a few, but the entire rogues gallery. Batman isn't Superman. He has limits. He can't accomplish just about anything. There's only so much a mortal man can do. Few stories explore this aspect of the character better than Nightfall. So let's talk rogues. I guess we should start with the main villain and instigator of the arc, Bane. Now, you really do have to read Vengeance of Bane before going into Nightfall. It's there where his motivations for doing all of the stuff he does in his arc are explained. Like I said in my review of that story, I don't fully buy into his reasons for being so obsessed with Batman Batman and Gotham. Bats are the embodiment of his fear, and to become a man free to forge his own destiny, one must conquer one's fear. Thus, Bane have to beat Batman. Gotham is the prize, the city that represented the outside world to Bane while he was imprisoned in Pena Duro. I mean, I guess it works, it just feels a bit forced. But I talked about all of that in the Vengeance of Bane video, so watch that if you missed it. There's a link for that one in the description too. Bane is very effectively portrayed as a big, scary, ominous threat, and already at the beginning of the arc, you just know that Batman is in deep shit here. He's not going to come out of this one in one piece. This is clearly what the creators were going for, and in that, they certainly succeeded. I think Bane is kinda acting like a cowardly cheater though. I mean, before he goes to face Bruce, he has him run through an entire gauntlet of his rogues gallery. When they finally confront each other, Bruce can barely stand up, let alone offer an actual challenge to Bane. I'm pretty sure Bane himself would have been in the same strung up shape if he was in Wayne's position. So how is he really conquering his fear? It's not a fair fight. I'm pretty sure the ventriloquist could have kicked Batman's ass at this point. For all Bane knows, he isn't man enough to best Bruce in his prime. So what does all of this really prove? I don't quite understand Bane's reasoning here. Sure, he keeps saying throughout the arc that he wants to study Batman, see how he works, what he's made of, get to know him intimately, as he puts it. That makes sense when you're this obsessed, but still, shouldn't he have waited till Bruce was rested up or something and then face him? Two ultimate fighters in their best shape. If Bane can beat the Batman at his most powerful, then he's truly vanquished his fears. This way he just cheated. Somehow to me it feels like the Bane from Vengeance of Bane wouldn't have done that. He came off as a man of honor, despite being a vicious killer. I do however love when Bane sees Bruce Wayne, he just instantly knows that it's Batman, because he studied the Cape Crusader so, and no mask can hide the Batman's true face. That's also really interesting, that Bane considers Bruce Wayne as the mask, and Batman as the true man. It's pretty reminiscent of Black Mask's philosophy. Those two guys probably would have gotten along really well. They both suffer from daddy's issues too. In short, I think Bane is a great antagonist in this arc, but not a very sympathetic character, which he was in his first appearance. So let's get into the Arkham escapees, and why not go through them in the order they made their first appearance in the arc. And I mean on the outside, not during the actual breakout, which means that first up is good old Jervis Tetch, aka the Mad Hatter. So Jervis is the first of the escaped rogues to make a move, and what he does is hold a tea party in the garden of an abandoned estate. He sends invitations to this party to the rest of the Arkhamites, with the promise that together they're gonna kill Batman, who's also invited as a guest of honor of course. None of the major rogues show up though, instead it's only a bunch of D-list villains, including Film Freak, who bothers to turn up. The Hatter is perfectly fine with this, and takes control of the guests via his signature mind control hats, which was his plan all along. As Jervis and his army of Arkhamites wait for Batman to arrive, Film Freak is sent out to gather information about the mysterious characters who orchestrated the Arkham breakout. The Hatter is curious as to their identity and scheme, and he also strongly dislikes being used as a puppet, as he feels that that's his gimmick. This makes me wonder what Jervis thinks of Poison Ivy, and also if her pheromones would even work on the deranged Hatter. Now I want the Mad Hatter versus Poison Ivy story. Anyway, so how do I feel that their own Jervis was handled in Nightfall? I gotta say, pretty darn good, and I even considered putting this story in my top 5 Hatter comics video. I like how he uses his shtick to take control of other Arkhamites, and that he's actually suspicious about Bane and his plan. None of the other rogues seems to be that, it's just Jervis, and he even goes to great lengths to investigate the matter, deducing the location of Bane's hideout. That's pretty impressive for a villain who's often called a B-list loser rogue. The idea that he resents being used as a pawn, as he's supposed to be the puppeteer, is also really interesting. So we have a pretty unique Hatter story here, as he isn't after money or kidnapping children or adult women resembling Alice. However, where this tale falls a bit short is simply by being too short. It's just one issue, a really good issue, but still. It ends a bit too quick, and I feel this one should have been a two-parter. If it had been, I'm pretty sure it would have been included in my best Hatter stories list. Next up is Arnold Wesker, aka the Ventriloquist. So last time Arnie was incarcerated, his boss, the dummy Scarface, was put in police storage. So Wesker is all on his own when he's set free by Bane. The guy can't function without a second personality bossing him around, however, so he slaps a sock on his hand and invents a new other personality named Socko, of course. Arnie and Socko then encounter Amygdala, a hulking beast with severe anger issues and the mind of a child, and together these three set out to find Scarface. By the way, both Amygdala and Film Freak will be covered in forgotten Batman villains eventually. Wesker isn't really satisfied with Socko though, so first they stop at a toy store where they search for a more suitable replacement. Here they run into Batman, who defeats and recaptures Amygdala while Arnold flees the scene, accompanied by a slew of different wacky personalities in the form of hand puppets from the toy store. Wesker continues his search for Scarface. This ventriloquist part is actually more of an arc than a singular story, as it's spread out and sprinkled all throughout the entire Nightfall saga, and it didn't really reach its proper conclusion until Prodigal 1 year later. I absolutely love this ventriloquist arc, and it's one of my favorite stories with the character. It's just hilarious with all these different personalities that Arnie uses, like an Irish cop named Officer O'Hara, and a rat character who actually rats Wesker out, the Batman. The bickering between these puppets is also funny as hell, and it gets really good when Socko finally meets Scarface. In this story we find out that Arnie is even more disturbed than what we had thought, and that's saying something. He doesn't just have the Scarface persona within him, but also these other crazy characters. The guy isn't suffering from a mere split personality, but multiple personalities. It's like he doesn't have a personality of his own, and that's why he has to create these characters, who are, by the way, ridiculous cliched stereotypes. That's all he can come up with apparently, and maybe it's because he just doesn't understand what actual people are like. This is kind of a new spin on his psychosis, and it's one that's both fascinating and very entertaining. Next, we have Victor Zsasz, the insane serial killer who carves a tally mark on his own body for each of his victims. Just like the Hatter, Zsasz is also merely featured in one issue, but it's a really great one. In it, Victor is holed up in a sorority house, where he's holding the sorority girls hostage, threatening to kill each and every one of them if the cops outside makes a move. Naturally, it's up to the already beaten and battered Batman to infiltrate the house and defuse the situation. This story feels like an homage to classic slasher movies of the 70s and 80s, especially Black Christmas from 1974, as that film also features an insane killer stalking sorority girls inside a sorority house. If you watch my horror channel, you know how much I love Black Christmas. It's my favorite slasher of all time, so naturally I'm a big fan of this tale. It's one of the best Victor Zsasz stories in my opinion. Besides the awesome horror premise, Batman and Victor also has a fascinating exchange during the climax of the story, where the killer taunts the Dark Knight, claiming that the two of them are the same. According to Zsasz, both of them are predators who love the thrill of stalking their prey, using fear and the shadows to exact power over their victims. He also insinuates that Batman actually wishes that he could just kill his foes, as it would make his job a lot easier and more satisfying. I think this is really interesting, and Victor definitely has a point. In a lot of ways they are the same, and killing off the Rogues Gallery would certainly solve a lot of problems for Gotham. While this story is just one part, I don't think it feels too short, like the Hatter one did. This one plays out perfectly across the span of one issue, and it's definitely one of my favorite parts of the arc. I also really love how Norm Breyfogle drew Zsasz. I wish the characters still looked like this, as opposed to the generic looking bald dude we have these days. Then we have the Killer Croc part, which is also just one issue. So right before Nightfall kicked into full gear and officially started, Bane had interrupted a fight between Croc and John Paul Valley, during which Bane beat the crap out of all Crockers and broke his arms. You really need to read that story in order to fully grasp this one. It's about Croc searching for Bane, intending to get his revenge. He finds the masked mountain of muscles in the sewers, where he's captured Robin and is interrogating the Boy Wonder about Batman. Croc then unintentionally rescues Robin when he attacks Bane, and the two have a rematch of their fight. I guess there's nothing really special about the Croc part, but I still like it. It's fun to see these characters interact, Croc, Bane, and Robin, and it's interesting that the villain's motivation is to fight another villain and not the hero. Croc doesn't care about Robin at all, even though he could have killed him. All he wants is Bane. Having these two monstrous behemoths fighting while little Robin is desperately trying to get the hell away from there is also a really cool scenario. This one ain't exactly amazing, but still very entertaining. Just like the ventriloquists, Croc's part wasn't fully resolved either until 1 year later during Prodigal. Then of course we have the Joker and Scarecrow team up. Joker gets the idea to kidnap Commissioner Gordon and use fear to control him, and then have the Commissioner foul up the entire police force, sending the city into further chaos. To accomplish this, he teams up with Cornelius Stirk. However, Stirk completely messes up his part during the attempted kidnapping and tries to kill Gordon instead. Batman arrives just in time to rescue his old friend and bring down Cornelius. However, the Joker gets away as he was watching the whole spectacle from another rooftop. The clown is then confronted by the Scarecrow, who's offended that Joker didn't come to him instead of Stirk, as he's the true master of fear. The Ace of Knaves admits his mistake and suggests that he wanted a lesser rogue whom he could control, which of course didn't work out. Scarecrow then proposes a team up as equal partners and suggests a grander scheme, namely to kidnap and use the mayor of Gotham instead. Joker accepts, and the two set out to terrorize Mayor Armand Kroll and force him to descend the city into total mayhem. I absolutely love this team up. It's just so entertaining to see Joker and Crane having a blast together as they terrorize the mayor and the city. They really do seem to be enjoying themselves, don't they? For some reason, I really like seeing these particular two rogues together. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it has to do with their themes, comedy and fear. Putting those two together is just interesting. Joker and Crane are also two of the most sinister members out of the rogues gallery, so it feels like they would work well as a team, which they do in this story. They both have their own motivations for wanting to go through with this plan as well. Joker's is simply to have fun, as nothing is more amusing to him than causing large-scale pandemonium. Scarecrow, however, explains later in the arc that he's actually expecting a ransom for the mayor, which he will spend on his fear experiments. So while he clearly enjoys scaring the shit out of Mayor Kroll and terrorizing Gotham, his main goal is advancing the sciences on fear. This is my preferred take on a character, as it makes him more unique. This part is also not a singular story, but more of a long arc, and it's probably the biggest one in Nightfall, besides the Bane parts of course. But when the Joker and the freaking Scarecrow team up, what else could you expect? So next up is Garfield Lynch, aka the Firefly. His story is also spread out over a few issues, and it features the first appearance of the revamped, modern take on the character, so it's here where the proper Firefly was born. In it, he's burning down various locations in Gotham, like an amusement park and a zoo. While Batman is busy chasing other Arkhamites, Robin does some investigating and is able to deduce that Garfield was promised as an orphan child to be taken to all these places by potential foster parents. However, whenever they discover Garfield's pyromania, they'd bow out. So Firefly is getting revenge, sorta, for his lost childhood. I included this one among my top 5 Firefly stories, and it is really great, giving the character some background and actual motives. He's also far from a C-list villain here, which he used to be prior to this revamp. In Nightfall, Lynch is a very formidable foe who manages to torch large parts of the city and put up one hell of a fight against Batman. Firefly is one of the escaped Arkham inmates who gives Bruce the most trouble actually. So yeah, what else can you really say about this part? It effectively turned the villain into both an actual character and a force to be reckoned with. Next we have the Riddler. Just like Croc, dear old Eddie had also experienced an encounter with Bane before Nightfall started, during which Bane pumped Enigma full of venom, turning him into a hulking beast. This experiment was meant as a test to see how well Batman could handle a foe who was both an intellectual and a physical threat. You don't really need to have read that one though, as none of that really comes into play here. Instead, Enigma is just up to his usual shtick, namely sending riddles to the police, cluing them in on his planned caper. However, there's a problem this time. Due to the mayhem caused by the mass breakout, no one at the precinct has any time to open Eddie's letters and read his riddles. Distraught that there's been no reaction to his messages on the news, Edward can't go on with the heist, leading to his hired goons kicking him out of his own operation and proceeding with the plan themselves. Without a job to pull and desperate for attention, Enigma gets the idea to crash a live talk show wearing a fake bomb vest, demanding the audience to answer riddles. This takes place during the same time as Batman is chasing after Firefly, so it's up to Robin to defuse the situation. This is actually a great Riddler story that perfectly showcases narcissistic need for attention, his smugness, and his obsession with turning crime into performance art. Those aspects of the character were present in previous stories, but it's here where the characterization of Enigma was completely nailed down. I just love how arrogant he is, talking down to his henchmen, calling them dunces for not understanding his self-perceived genius. It's kinda funny how things end up though. Riddler, who treats his capers like an art form, is forced to commit such an unsophisticated and vulgar crime, like crashing a talk show, just to get the attention he craves. The scene where he sits down with the host and guests of the show and talks with them is also absolutely hilarious. Now we've reached the penultimate rogue, Poison Ivy. So good old Pamela's naughty little scheme involves crashing a charity bash held by Bruce Wayne, putting all of the wealthy men there under her trance. Her plan is then to essentially command them into giving their fortunes to her. Really simple in other words, and that's the flaw of the Ivy part. It's so generic and plain. There's nothing special about her plot or how the character is written. It's a standard Ivy committing an uninspired crime. However, technically there's nothing really wrong with that, and the story isn't bad, nor is Pamela portrayed incorrectly. She's a pure evil seductive femme fatale here, who uses her powers for greed. That's a depiction we've seen many times. Although it may not be everyone's preferred take on a character, it certainly ain't mine. I like a sinister femme fatale Ivy, but I generally favor the more sympathetic, outcast plant lady portrayal. That's the thing about the character, she's been depicted in so many vastly different ways. Since her sole goal in this arc is cash, I've gotta say this is one of my least favorite versions, and also my least favorite rogue in Nightfall. It's not a bad story, just a too generic and ultimately uninteresting one. So now we finally have the last of the escaped Arkhamites, and who else could it be but my favorite, Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. So the Two-Face part is actually shown in flashback after Batman has been broken by Bane. It supposedly takes place 3 weeks earlier, and in it Two-Face sets in motion a scheme to get revenge on Batman for breaking up their partnership years ago. This is a reference to Eye of the Beholder, Two-Face's origin story, where Batman realized that Harvey Dent was mentally unstable and therefore ended their alliance before Harvey had fully become Two-Face. So anyway, in this tale Dent acquires an army of goons by threatening a big shot gangster, and then he uses these mooks as part of a mock trial that he puts on for Batman. Harvey is going to prove the Dark Knight guilty of betraying his friend and ally all those years ago, and then exact the suitable punishment. Right, so while this story is pretty great, it does have some major issues. One being that it's shown in flashback after the bat breaking. This completely disrupts the flow and pacing of the arc, which had been perfect up until this point. Also, it takes place 3 weeks ago? How the hell does that work? You get the feeling Nightfall plays out over the span of a few days, 1 week at the most, but not several weeks like this one suggests. This also further ruins the flow of the story. Then you have Harvey's plot. Why is he suddenly all upset over something that happened 10 or 11 years ago? Because that's how long it must be, seeing as Eye of the Beholder takes place during the Year 2 era. And as I said earlier, Nightfall must be about 12 years into Batman's crusade. This story really comes off as a direct sequel to the Eye of the Beholder, picking up on many plot points from that story. Several people, like the gangsters, don't seem to know who Two-Face is either, like he's a new villain in town or something. This has me strongly believe that this story was in fact originally supposed to have nothing to do with Nightfall and actually be a direct sequel to Two-Face's origin, perhaps published in Legends of the Dark Knight, which always featured stories set in Batman's early days. However, realizing that they had missed including Dent during Nightfall, they grabbed whichever Two-Face story they had lying around and had it rewritten to fit in with the arc. That's my theory at least. Besides these pretty big problems, the plot itself of the comic is great, with an interesting motivation for Harvey, and I love it when he puts on mock trials. So there you have it. That's Nightfall, and my opinions on how all of the rogues were handled. None of them are outright bad, which is pretty amazing, all things considered, and the only ones who are a bit disappointing is Ivy and Harvey. This video went on way longer than I had anticipated, which is why it's taken me so long to get it done. It took me 4 days to write the damn thing, which usually just takes 1 day, 2 at the most. Anyway, to sum up, Nightfall is great and should fit any type of Batman fan. It's got both comedic and dark serious moments. It offers a fascinating look at the character of Batman, while also pitting him against a major ominous threat. And it's also a rogue fest, showcasing most of the classic Batman villains. No matter what type of bat tale you prefer, you can't go wrong with this one. It's got something for everyone. I'm kind of wondering if I shouldn't have ranked it higher on my list of the best Batman comics. Well, let's cut it here, shall we? And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.